I never imagined my life would turn out this way. For years, I had been told I was nothing without him, without his name, without his success. But the truth is, I am so much more than what I've been led to believe. The truth was just waiting to be uncovered. My story begins in the middle of a dinner, a quiet one that would change everything. My wife, Laura, looked across the table at me with that familiar, critical gaze. She had always been the one to decide what was worth doing and what was not. "You'll never be anything without me," she said, her voice cold, almost calculated. I froze for a second, but not because I was shocked. No, it was because deep down, I knew she was right about one thing. I had always relied on her for validation. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, not expecting much of an answer. She just shrugged, turning her attention back to her phone. "You can't do anything without my support. You know that. I'm the one who keeps things together." Her words stung, more than they should have. They echoed in my mind, but something inside me snapped. I wasn't the man she thought I was. I wasn't the man she had made me out to be. I was capable of more, far more, than I'd ever been allowed to believe. This wasn't just about proving her wrong anymore. This was about proving it to myself. I had spent too many years buried under her shadow, pretending to be content while watching my life slip by. But that night, something changed. A fire, small at first, began to burn within me. I wasn't going to take it anymore. I would build my own success, without her, without anyone telling me what I could or couldn't achieve. I wasn't the man Laura thought I was. I was going to show her just how wrong she was. But more importantly, I was going to prove to myself that I could succeed. The very next day, I set the wheels in motion. It started small, learning about investments, reading books on finance, talking to people who had been where I was. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Nothing ever is. But for the first time in years, I felt alive. I was ready to take the leap. My first step was a risk, but one I knew I had to take. I put everything I had into a business venture. It felt right, even though it was terrifying. But I was tired of being controlled by her. I had spent too long feeling small, insignificant. I was ready to grow, to do something for myself. A few months later, things started falling into place. Slowly, I started to see returns. They weren't huge at first, but enough to show me that I wasn't just dreaming. My hard work was paying off. Every day, I worked harder, pushing myself further. I felt like I was finally doing something for me, not for anyone else. And then, one day, it happened. I got the phone call that would change everything. A major client wanted to work with me, someone big. The kind of deal I used to dream about, but never thought I could actually land. I felt a rush of excitement. This was my moment, my chance to show Laura, to show everyone, that I could do this on my own. But more than that, it was a chance to show myself that I wasn't just the man she had dismissed. I was more than that. I could be anything I wanted to be. The deal closed, and I knew right then that everything was about to change. I had finally found my path. I wasn't going to be the man Laura thought I was. I wasn't going to stay small. This was just the beginning. My life was about to be bigger than she ever imagined. The days that followed that dinner felt different. It was like a veil had been lifted from my eyes. I had been living a lie, believing that my worth was tied to Laura's approval. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I would no longer depend on her for validation, for success, or for anything. I was going to prove her wrong. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. My first step was to figure out how to start. I had no experience running my own business, but I had an idea that had been floating around in my mind for months. I had always been fascinated by real estate, particularly the potential of flipping houses. I had read about it, heard people talk about it, but I had never really believed it was something I could do. But that day, as I sat with my coffee, something clicked. I would learn. I didn't need Laura's approval or permission. I was going to take the leap on my own. The first few weeks were rough. I had no idea what I was doing. I spent hours reading books, watching videos, talking to anyone I could find who knew something about real estate. I made mistakes, big ones. I lost money on my first property, but I didn't let that stop me. Each mistake became a lesson, and each lesson brought me closer to the success I knew I was capable of. Laura, of course, had no idea what I was up to. I didn't tell her. I didn't need to. She had already written me off as a failure, so there was no point in trying to explain my new venture to her. Instead, I quietly worked in the background, focusing on what mattered, building something that was mine, something that no one could take away from me. Slowly, things began to turn around. I secured my first major deal, a property that was in need of a lot of work but had incredible potential. I knew it was going to take time and money to fix it up, but I was confident it would pay off. I worked day and night, overseeing every detail, making sure everything was done right. As the weeks passed, I watched as the house began to take shape. It was hard work, but it was rewarding. And then, the day finally came. I sold the house for double what I had paid for it. I couldn't believe it. I had done it. I had taken a risk, learned from my mistakes, and turned it into success. The feeling of accomplishment was overwhelming. I realized then that I had finally stepped into a life I could be proud of. I wasn't the man Laura had once told me I would never be. I was someone who could achieve anything I set my mind to. I took the money from the sale of that house and reinvested it into another property. And another. Each one was a little bigger, a little more ambitious. With every project, I grew more confident in my abilities. But the real turning point came. When I made my first million, it wasn't just the money that mattered. It was the fact that I had done it on my own, without anyone's help. It felt like a victory, not just over Laura, but over every doubt I had ever had about myself. The man I was becoming was someone I could respect. I wasn't a failure. I wasn't a man who was nothing without her. I was a man who could create something from nothing. And that was a feeling I never wanted to lose. I had reached a point where I no longer cared about proving myself to Laura. Sure, her dismissal had stung, but the more I thought about it, the less it mattered. I wasn't doing this for her anymore. I was doing this for me. Every morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose, something I hadn't had in years. The feeling of control, of building something from the ground up, was more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined. I didn't just want to succeed in real estate. I wanted to redefine who I was. The next property I took on was bigger, more ambitious. It was a dilapidated old house in need of serious renovation. Some people would have run from it, but not me. I saw potential. It was a challenge I was ready to face. I spent weeks researching, meeting contractors, and making sure every decision I made was informed. I wasn't just another guy with money. I was someone who understood the value of hard work. The progress was slow at first, but every little improvement made me more determined. The first time I saw the house starting to look like something more, I couldn't help but smile. It was proof that I wasn't just dreaming. I was building a future. The house was my canvas, and I was creating something beautiful. But as much as I was focused on the work, there was always that lingering thought in the back of my mind. Laura. I wondered if she had noticed the changes in me. I wondered if she realized that I wasn't the same person she had once dismissed. Weeks passed, and the house was finally ready. It was a different world inside now. New floors, new paint, new life. When I listed the property, I couldn't believe how quickly it sold. The deal went through smoothly, and just like that, I had doubled my investment. The success felt incredible, but it was more than that. It was a validation of my efforts, my vision, my decision to stop living under someone else's thumb. The money was just a bonus. What really mattered was that I had created something from nothing, all on my own. I didn't need anyone's approval, not even Laura's. As I sat back and looked at the final sale figures, I realized how far I had come. This wasn't just about real estate anymore. This was about redefining my life. I knew that this was only the beginning. My next move was clear. I was going to build my own empire, one brick at a time, and no one, least of all Laura, was going to stop me. I was no longer the man she had dismissed. I had become someone who had control, who had power, who had a future. And this was just the start. The next property, the next project, it would be even bigger, even more successful. I was on a path, and nothing could derail me now. As the weeks went by, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in myself, in what I had accomplished. But more importantly, I realized something else. I had found my purpose. For so long, I had lived for someone else's approval. But now, I was living for myself, and it felt incredible. I had reached a point where I no longer needed to prove myself to Laura. Sure, I wanted to show her that I was capable of succeeding on my own, but deep down, I knew it wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. It was about what I had built, what I had achieved on my own terms. I had started from nothing, and now I had a life that was entirely mine, free from her judgment and manipulation. But as the days went by, something started to nag at me. Laura. I hadn't heard from her since I made my first big sale. She knew nothing about the house I had flipped or the money I had earned. In fact, I hadn't even told her about my success, not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't need her to validate it. Yet, the curiosity lingered. How would she react when she found out? It was a thought that kept me up at night. I knew she wouldn't be happy for me. That wasn't who she was. But still, I wasn't prepared for how it would feel when I finally told her. The confrontation wasn't planned. It just happened. I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through property listings, when Laura walked in. She looked exactly as she always did. Perfectly put together, her smile as practiced as ever. But there was something in her eyes, something that told me she had heard rumors. "I heard you've been busy," she said, her voice smooth, but with an edge I hadn't noticed before. "Been making a lot of money, haven't you?" I looked up at her, trying to hide the satisfaction I felt inside. "I've been working hard. Things are going well." Her eyes narrowed. "Well enough to buy a new car?" she asked, her tone more biting now. I could tell she was fishing for something, anything she could use to belittle me. "It's not about the car," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "It's about the work, the effort, the results." Laura's face softened, but only for a moment. "I see. Well, don't get too comfortable. You may have made a little money, but you still need me. You've always needed me." Her words hit me like a slap. "I don't need you anymore, Laura," I said, feeling the weight of those words as they left my mouth. "I'm not the man I was when I met you. I'm not the man who was always looking for your approval. I'm someone else now, and that's what scares you." There was silence between us, thick with the tension of everything that had gone unsaid for so long. Laura opened her mouth as if to say something, but then closed it again. For a moment, I saw something in her eyes, regret, maybe even guilt. But it was fleeting. "You think you've won," she said quietly. "But I'm still your wife, Jack. You still need me." I stood up and walked toward the door. "I don't need you," I repeated, my voice firm. "And I'm done pretending that I do." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out the door, leaving her behind, just like I had left everything else behind that had kept me shackled to a life of mediocrity. I had built something on my own, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Laura, take that from me. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of relief and empowerment. I had taken control of my life, and now I was free to live it the way I had always imagined. It wasn't about proving anything to Laura anymore. It was about proving something to myself, that I could stand on my own 2 feet, without anyone else's help. I was finally living for me. I drove for hours, not really knowing where I was going. The road ahead was endless, but it didn't matter. I was free. Free from Laura, free from the life I had been living for so long. As the miles passed, the weight on my shoulders began to lift, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was a strange feeling, almost foreign. For so long, I had been living in survival mode, doing whatever I could to get by. But now I was thriving. My business was growing, and I was making decisions for myself. I could already see where my life was heading, and it was something I could be proud of. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing. I was in control. I made the decision to take a break from everything for a while. I needed time to recharge, to figure out what my next steps would be. I booked a cabin in the mountains, far away from the city, and spent a few days just being alone with my thoughts. The isolation was peaceful. There was no pressure, no expectations. I could just be. It was during this time that I realized something. I had been so focused on proving myself to others that I had lost sight of what truly mattered to me. I had spent years trying to make Laura happy, trying to meet her expectations, and in the process, I had forgotten what made me happy. I had been living for someone else, not for myself. And that had to change. As I sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunset over the mountains, I made a vow to myself. I would no longer live for anyone else. I would pursue my dreams, my passions, and my goals. I would make decisions based on what was best for me, not what others expected of me. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need to be validated by Laura or anyone else. I had everything I needed within myself. The next day, I packed my bags and headed back to the city. I had a new sense of purpose, and I was ready to take on whatever came next. When I got home, I started working on my business again, but this time with a renewed sense of clarity. I wasn't just building something for the sake of proving a point. I was building something that would bring me fulfillment, something that would make me proud. It was no longer about money or success for the sake of success. It was about creating a life I could be proud of. Slowly, things started to fall into place. My business grew even more, and the projects I worked on became more successful. But the most important change was internal. I had found peace. I had found a sense of purpose. And that was worth more than anything else. Laura never really understood what happened. She didn't know how to handle the changes I had made in my life. She would occasionally try to reach out, but I had moved on. I had stopped seeking her approval, and that made all the difference. I was no longer her failure to fix. I was Jack Matthews, a man who had found his own way. And I was proud of who I had become. The road ahead was still long, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had made it this far on my own, and I knew I could keep going. I was in charge of my own destiny now. The next few months were a blur of hard work, late nights, and long days. The projects kept coming, and with each one, my confidence grew. I had built a reputation for myself, not as Laura's husband, but as Jack Matthews, a man who could achieve anything he set his mind to. The real estate market was booming, and every deal I made felt like another step in the right direction. I started taking on bigger projects, moving into commercial properties, and even developing a few of my own. There were moments of doubt, of course. There always are when you're venturing into something new. But the difference was, I no longer allowed those doubts to control me. I had learned to embrace the uncertainty, to take risks, and trust in my ability to handle whatever came my way. One morning, I received a call from my old friend, Greg. We hadn't spoken in years, not since I had become so consumed by work and the constant battle of trying to please Laura. Greg was a successful investor, someone I had always looked up to, and hearing from him was a surprise. "Jack, I've been hearing about you," Greg said, his voice full of enthusiasm. "You've really made a name for yourself. I'm impressed." His words made me feel a sense of pride, but also a bit of disbelief. "Thanks, Greg," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just doing my best." "No, Jack," Greg said firmly. "You're not just doing your best. You're doing great things. I have an opportunity for you." He went on to explain a large commercial property that was about to hit the market, one that he thought I could flip for a massive profit. It was risky, but that's what I had come to thrive on. I took a deep breath and agreed to the deal. The project turned out to be bigger and more profitable than I had ever imagined. I sold the property for a price that gave me a return that I couldn't have dreamed of when I first started this journey. It was the kind of success I had only heard about in stories, and now it was mine. I felt a sense of satisfaction that was hard to describe. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about knowing that I had done this on my own, without anyone's help. I had made it. The next day, I received a message from Laura. It was short and simple. "I heard about the property deal." Impressive. I stared at the message for a moment, not sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to not engage with her at all, but I couldn't help myself. I replied, "Thanks. I'm doing well." There was a long pause before she responded. "I always knew you had it in you. I just didn't think you'd figure it out without me." I read her words over and over, trying to understand what she meant. Was it a compliment, or was she trying to claim some credit for my success? Either way, I realized something important in that moment. I didn't need her validation. I didn't need anyone's approval. The only approval I needed was my own. The realization hit me like a wave. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to Laura, trying to make her proud, when the only person I needed to make proud was myself. It wasn't about showing her that I could do it without her. It was about realizing that I had always been capable of more than she ever gave me credit for. I had finally found my strength, and that was the greatest reward. I sat back and thought about everything I had accomplished. I had started with nothing, and now I was building an empire. I was no longer the man I had once been, and I had Laura's dismissive words to thank for that. They had pushed me to become something more. They had pushed me to become the man I had always been meant to be. As the weeks went by, my business continued to grow, and so did my confidence. Every deal I closed, every property I flipped, added another layer of belief in myself. But despite all the success, there was still something gnawing at the back of my mind. Laura. I had proven her wrong, but why did I still feel like there was unfinished business between us? It wasn't about love, not anymore. It wasn't even about proving I could make it without her. It was something deeper, something I couldn't shake. I had worked so hard to reach this point, but I still carried the weight of her words, her dismissal. I needed closure, not for her, but for me. I decided it was time to face her, to have the conversation I had been avoiding for months. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I couldn't move forward until I did. I arranged to meet her at the coffee shop near her office. It was the same place we had gone to when we first met, a place full of memories I had long since pushed aside. When I walked in, I saw her sitting by the window, looking just as put together as ever. She didn't notice me at first, so I stood there for a moment, watching her. The woman who had once been my everything now felt like a stranger. She looked up and saw me, and for a brief moment, her eyes softened. "Jack," she said, her voice tentative, almost unsure. "It's been a while." I sat down across from her, the familiar discomfort settling in. "It has," I replied. There was an awkward silence, one that felt heavier than it should have. Finally, Laura spoke again. "I heard about the business. I'm impressed." Her words didn't hit me the way I expected. They didn't carry the weight of validation I had once longed for. Instead, they felt like empty words, hollow and lacking sincerity. "Thank you," I said, but it didn't feel like a true acknowledgement of what I had accomplished. "You've done well for yourself," she continued. "I always knew you had potential, but I didn't think you'd get there without me." I looked at her, not sure how to respond. For a moment, I considered telling her everything. How her words had pushed me, how I had built this life despite everything she had said. But I stopped myself. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need her approval. "I'm not the same man you used to know," I said quietly. "I've changed, and I'm okay with that." Laura's expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw something like regret flicker across her face. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "I know you've changed," she said, her voice softer now. "I can see that. But it's not just about the business, Jack. It's about who you are now. You've built something, but you've lost yourself in the process." Her words cut deeper than I expected, but I held my ground. "I haven't lost myself, Laura," I said, my voice firm. "I've finally found myself. And that's all that matters." We sat there in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. I realized then that this conversation wasn't for her. It wasn't for closure with Laura. It was for me. I had done what I set out to do. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. As I stood to leave, I looked at her one last time. "Goodbye, Laura," I said quietly. "I hope you find what you're looking for." I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked out of the coffee shop, the doors closing softly behind me. And just like that, I felt free. Free from the past, free from the need for her validation, free to live my life on my own terms. I had come full circle, and I was finally at peace. The days after leaving Laura were filled with a strange sense of freedom, but also uncertainty. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't tethered to anyone's expectations. I had always lived my life in a way that made others comfortable, especially Laura. I had tried to live up to her standards, to be the man she thought I should be. But now I was free. The weight I had carried for so long was gone. I realized something important. I had been chasing success for the wrong reasons. It wasn't about proving something to Laura anymore. It was about proving it to myself, about building a life that I could be proud of without anyone's approval. As the weeks went by, I continued to focus on my business. The deals kept coming, and I kept making strides in the real estate world. But as much as I was succeeding professionally, something was missing. I didn't have anyone to share it with. The loneliness began to creep in, but I didn't let it stop me. I kept going, focusing on my work, pushing forward. But one day, something unexpected happened. My phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer it. "Jack," the voice on the other end said. "It's Greg." I hadn't heard from Greg in months, not since that last big deal we worked on together. "How have you been?" I asked, surprised to hear from him. "Good, good," Greg replied, his voice warm. "Listen, I've been thinking about you. I've seen the progress you've made. You're doing great things, Jack. But I've also been thinking about the next step. I think it's time we partnered up on something bigger." His words caught me off guard. A partnership? Greg had always been a bit of a lone wolf, much like me. We'd worked together before, but this was different. This was an offer to combine forces. "What do you have in mind?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "There's a project," Greg said, "a huge commercial property deal. It's risky, but it's got potential. I think it's the kind of thing that could take both of us to the next level. What do you think?" I sat back in my chair, processing what he was saying. This was the kind of opportunity one had dreamed of, but there was a part of me that hesitated. The thought of partnering up, of trusting someone else again, was daunting. but I couldn't ignore the excitement bubbling up inside me. This was a chance to truly step into the next phase of my life, to build something even bigger than I had before. "I'm in," I said, my voice steady. "Let's do it." The decision was made, and just like that, everything changed again. I threw myself into the project with the same passion and drive that had brought me this far. The deal was complicated, but with Greg's expertise and my own determination, we made it work. The project was a success, and it was bigger than anything I had done on my own. We sold the property for a significant profit, and just like that, I had reached a new level of success. But the greatest part was the feeling of partnership. I had found someone I could trust, someone who saw me for what I had become, not for what I had been. It felt good, and it reminded me that even though I had built my life alone, there was no harm in sharing it with the right people. Greg and I celebrated the success together, but I knew this was just the beginning. There was so much more ahead of me, and I wasn't going to stop now. I had finally found my place in the world. I was Jack Matthews, and nothing, no one, could take that from me. As the months passed, my partnership with Greg grew stronger, and so did my business. The projects became bigger, the stakes higher, and the success more tangible. I was no longer the man who had to fight for every step forward. I had built something solid, something that wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The satisfaction of seeing my work come to life was unmatched. I had done it. I had reached a point in my life where I didn't have to worry about money, where I didn't have to answer to anyone. But with that success, there came another realization. I had stopped looking at the past, and the past had started looking at me. One evening, as I was finishing up at the office, I received a message from Laura. It was short and simple. "Can we talk?" I didn't know what to expect. After everything, after all the years of bitterness and distance, I wasn't sure what she wanted. Part of me wanted to ignore it. I didn't know her anything. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the man I used to be, wondered if there was something important left unsaid. I agreed to meet her, and we arranged to meet at a restaurant, a neutral ground. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table by the window, just as composed as ever. She looked up when she saw me, her expression unreadable. "Jack," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. "I didn't expect you to say yes." "I didn't either," I replied. "But here I am." We both chuckled, but it was the kind of forced laughter that made the air between us feel thick with unspoken tension. "How have you been?" she asked. It was a question that, under normal circumstances, would have felt like a routine check-in, but with everything that had happened between us, it felt hollow. "I'm good," I said. "You?" She nodded slowly. "I'm doing okay. Things have changed. I've been thinking about everything, Jack. About us." Her words were careful, measured. I could see the weight of years of regret behind her eyes, but I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel the need to comfort her. "What is it that you want, Laura?" I asked, my voice steady. She sighed, looking out the window for a moment before turning back to me. "I've been thinking a lot about how things ended between us. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry for that." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, to not let her words pull me back into a place I had already left behind. "It's a little late for apologies, don't you think?" I said quietly. "I've moved on. I've built a life for myself, and I'm proud of that." Her eyes flickered with something. "Guilt, maybe?" "I know you have. I've been watching. You've done well for yourself." "It wasn't just about doing well for myself, Laura," I said, leaning in slightly. "It was about proving I could stand on my own 2 feet. I'm not the man you thought I was, and I don't need your approval anymore." The words felt like a weight being lifted off my chest. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to her, to the people around me, and I didn't need to anymore. "I never meant to make you feel small, Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was helping you." "No, you weren't," I said firmly. "You were controlling me. But I'm not that man anymore. I've changed, and I've done it on my own." She looked down at her hands, her fingers nervously tapping the table. "I guess I just wanted to say I see that now. I see who you've become, and I respect it." The sincerity in her voice took me by surprise. But it wasn't enough to undo the years of manipulation, the years of feeling less than I was. "I appreciate that, but it doesn't change anything," I said. "I've moved on, Laura, and I'm happy now, with or without your approval." There was a long silence between us, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I just felt free. "I'm glad you're doing well, Jack," she finally said. I really am. I hope you find peace. I nodded, standing up. I already have. As I walked out of the restaurant, I didn't look back. I had closed that chapter of my life, and I was ready to keep moving forward. The man I was now didn't need to dwell on the past. I had my future ahead of me, and it was mine to build, without anyone's help, without anyone's approval.